Okay, today we're going to ask the question, are we there yet? How many of you have had children? How many of you have had children that have asked that question more times than you can remember? Beth and our two kids and I were on a vacation, although I'm not sure I would really call it that now. It was a car trip that went up through from Michigan to Washington State, down the coast of California and over. It was a very, very long trip. And the destination was really home. The journey was really the destination to see things, but the kids were very young, and they were, small enough to stand on the back floorboard and lean over the seat and ask if we were there yet. And I heard that so many times that I finally had to come up with an answer, and the answer was, yes, we're here. And that's the only place we'll ever be. And they did not like that answer. And none of us do, actually. But I was telling them the truth. You're not supposed to lie to your kids, so I was being as honest with them as I knew how to be. So that's why I'm subtitling this talk today, The Lost Art of Getting Here from There. We usually have that in reverse, getting there from here. So this is a very important idea, and I also had someone ask if I would talk about this because they've heard me say, someone online, they've heard me say in the past that we're not, as a race, moving toward an ideal, a spiritual ideal in particular, because that ideal is already present. It's not something that we will achieve ever. It's something we either wake up to or we don't. We're either on a trip wondering when we're going to arrive, or we're on the trip arriving every step of the way, realizing that we can only be where we are. And there's a lot of depth to that realization when we reach it. But one thing that, one of my favorite scriptures comes from James. He says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. And when we read this or hear it, we might think of the great gifts of God coming down from the heavens, from the sky. And actually the word heavens, as used in Matthew in particular, this is not Matthew, but the same idea of coming from above. The word heavens comes from the Greek word eronos, and it means to expand. And we have thought of heaven as being a place where it's really a process. It's really a movement of mind. When you get yourself out of your spiritual rut, as all of us have, coming to a place like this, we were probably all indoctrinated with a certain set of beliefs, and we took a look at those over the years. Maybe we had some crisis in our lives. We reached the end of their ability to help us, and we pushed beyond. So we expanded. We expanded our receptivity to a deeper reality. Most of us start out believing in a set of doctrines, in a statement of faith that somebody gives us. That's our standard of belief. Do you believe this statement of faith? Do you believe these ideas that someone else came up with? And so we go that route. Most of us adopt that. We accept some form of belief. We're born into it. Our whole culture is carrying a lot of beliefs. We're getting to the point where we're not sure what that is anymore, but the whole idea that my faith is not in something alive, but is in a set of ideas. We expand from that. We say that that's not where we are to look. We get to the point where we're not, and usually it's a crisis that brings us to that point. Some major catastrophe in our life. Our faith, so-called faith, the answers aren't there anymore. And we ask our religious leaders that gave us these ideas, how does this apply to what I'm going through? I asked a minister that question one time, a particular thing I was going through, and he said, you just have to accept it on faith. And that's doesn't always feel so good, to be told that, because you still feel like you're left hanging with nothing. But you've got these ideas that you're supposed to continue to adhere to, this statement of faith. So what James is talking about here, perfect gift from above, it's not really an above as you would think, but a higher level of perception, a higher level of understanding. We actually live in the completed kingdom at this moment, which I think is why Jesus said, you don't look low here and low there. It's not coming with observation, and that's what we insist on. We insist on looking out at ourselves, or looking out from ourselves, looking at society, watching the changes that we're going through on a social level, and getting hope or despair as the result of what we're seeing. We're hoping that we're going to see signs of this coming kingdom in our society. And I would say that is a false hope. We will never get it that way. And if we're getting it that way, we're simply fulfilling a belief. We're not having a direct experience with what James is talking about here, this perfect gift coming from above. It's experience. It's an experience. It's not a set of ideas. It's not a hope. And what so many people do is they jump on a bandwagon. It's called groupthink. Jump on a bandwagon where the majority says someday, human consciousness is going to make a breakthrough and we're all going to live from this spiritual perspective. We're all going to celebrate our oneness. I don't think that day's ever coming. I don't think it has to come. The foundation, the spiritual reality doesn't change. It's never gone. It's never more, never less. Human perception comes and goes all the time. It goes in and out all the time. And a collective human perception is groupthink. It's like, it's not something that I get from myself. It's not something that comes from the core of my being, from on high, from above, as James says. That part of me, that part of the experience, the spiritual experience, where there's no change, no variation or shadow due to change, I experience that within myself. And for the most part, the majority of people that are waiting for something to happen have not had that experience, which is why they're still waiting. And that will include all of us to some degree. I've experienced enough of this changeless reality to know it's not coming from a perfectly organized society or a perfectly organized world where we have one world in love with each other. It's not necessarily going to happen. It doesn't have to happen. We may say that because the world is not at peace, I can't be at peace. And that is one of the biggest mistakes we make on the spiritual path. Where I am in my understanding has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with society, has nothing to do with the country, has nothing to do with the globe. It has everything to do with where I am. In my own understanding, the fields are already for harvest. The spiritual dimension is forever present. I ran across something I think is very interesting, and I'm not advocating a belief in Atlantis necessarily, but I really like what Plato had to say about why they met their demise. And I don't necessarily agree with his summation of why, that they were in a sense being punished, but I really like what he says. He says, for many generations they, the Atlanteans, obeyed the laws and loved the divine to which they were akin. They reckoned that qualities of character were far more important than their present prosperity. So they bore the burden of their wealth and possessions lightly, and did not let their high standard of living intoxicate them or make them lose their self-control. I think he's describing our present culture, Western culture, in that, is that we've actually let that happen. He goes on to say that when the divine element in them became weakened and their human traits became predominant, they cease to be able to carry their prosperity with moderation. So our belief switches to not who we are, but what we have. And that's basically, I think, what he's saying, that there was a shift in the consciousness of this ancient race of people. And the reason you don't have to believe in Atlantis, this is human nature, that we're watching it today. We're watching it, we've watched it always. That there is a shift from the belief in who we are and what we are to what we produce and how much of what we produce we own. Our identity becomes not in who we are, but in what we have. That shift occurs. And so we put less emphasis on who we are. It's okay to lie. It's okay to deceive as long as we have. As long as we have stuff. And that's a shift I think we're seeing. It's called materialism, but there's nothing wrong with materialism. What is wrong is when we start defining ourselves by what we have rather than what we are as spiritual beings at our core. And this happens on an individual basis. It happens collectively. It's who can get the most. There was an article in, I don't know where I read it, online, I guess, about Christmas lights and how the neighbors are having to keep up with the neighbors. Anybody see that? It's maybe you see it in your own neighborhood. I don't put up Christmas lights outside. I did that one year and it was too much work. And I just thought, I don't want to do that. And we do it here. It's so nice here that I figure I don't need 2 doses of that. So the neighbors put stuff up and I don't feel compelled to have to keep up with them. And what is that? I mean, why would I? Why would anybody feel that? If you're in the spirit and you want to do it, do it. You know, that's fine. This is not a sermon about Christmas lights. But what Plato is saying here is a shift occurred in the consciousness, the collective consciousness of people, where they were modest about their prosperity. And it also says that that consciousness, that connection with the divine produces prosperity. That's one of the important things that you see here. Prosperity is the effect, the result of. And so when we lose that understanding that you seek first the kingdom and all these things are added, all these other things are added, the clothing occurs, you start looking for the clothing first, hoping that the inner thing will be filled, and that's what we're seeing in our culture. We're seeing a lack of that. People are scrambling to get, trying to fill a void they feel in themselves. And this is expressed in many ways. People are unhappy, restless. We know it ourselves when we are after something, thinking if I just resolve this, I'll be peaceful. And yes, we do want to resolve issues in our lives. It's not about just ignoring what's going on in our daily life. But it's, will that make me more of a person? And if it will make me more of a person, then I'm barking up the wrong tree. I'm not touching that part of me that does not change. There's no change due to shadow. Or variation. There's no, I'm looking for that anchor. That anchor is me. It's my connection with the infinite. It's not in what I have, it's in who I am. And that's a very powerful realization to have. So I just thought that was very interesting, goes along well with this. Another aspect of this is the idea of law, and we're going to put the soul in this category of spiritual law. Science did not invent the laws that allow for space travel. They discovered these laws. This is a drawing or an illustration of the Mars rover that's up there right now looking around, which I think is phenomenal. But scientists had to figure out how to get off this Earth, build a rocket to get off this Earth. There's a whole set of laws that they had to obey. They had to build a machine that would obey those laws, that would conform to those laws. They had to conform to the laws that allow that spacecraft to travel through space to Mars, and all the calculations it takes to do that. And then they had to obey all the laws that govern Mars, that govern that atmosphere, and they're having to obey those now. But what's important here is that they did not invent any of these laws. The laws are eternal. They've always been there. They were there during the Stone Age. But there was not a mind to tap into them. There was not a mind to grasp those laws. And so what evolves here is our understanding. It's not reality. It's not the reality. It's the understanding of reality. So when we ask the question from our own spiritual perspective, am I there yet? How close am I to spiritual illumination? It depends on how well conformed my thinking is to what is already done, what is already complete. The soul, this set of spiritual laws that has always existed. I am conforming to something that's already there. My mind is conforming to something that's already there. So if I am waiting, if I'm looking down the road, hoping my good is going to develop down the road someplace, or if enough of us get together and think alike, somehow we're going to create something that is wonderful, I'm overlooking the laws that allow me to launch this rocket and land on Mars. I'm overlooking the only reality that can change my life. I'm overlooking that which I am as a spiritual being. And that's why we never get there. I've been in ministry around 40 years. From the very beginning, I got in and I remember we had guest speakers come into our conferences talking about this, I think it was a harmonic conversion or something that was going on at the time. That was the big deal. This thing that, the whole planet is now waking up and we're all getting it. And, we're just, all war is going to cease and all the stuff that we don't like is going to go away. And everybody was, all excited about that. And the speaker that represented, I can't think of his name at the moment, you'd probably know him, but there's been so many, I lose track. But he was like a Baptist minister getting up, pounding the pulpit, about how all this great stuff is happening. So 40 years later, I'm looking at the world and I'm seeing about the same world I saw back then. It doesn't change. Human nature doesn't change. Human nature remains pretty much the same. It's probably been the same as far back as our recorded history is. And you read stuff, that's one of the things they found on some of the graffiti they found in Pompeii, when all the people were inundated by the volcano. Some of the graffiti, there was an election going on that year, I guess, and some of the graffiti that they found was, we get rid of one group of scoundrels, we'll just get another. What good does an election do? But they were talking about human character, human nature. And there's an element in us that looks to the outside, looks at the social aspect of humanity, and we're looking for something to change, looking for something to prove to us that God really is present, that God is emerging through the consciousness and so on. That doesn't have to happen. And it's not going to happen. I don't think it ever happens. I think that we're on this earth because of a materialistic consciousness that we have a desire to be at this level. And as soon as we lose that desire, we don't come back. I was just thinking about Jeannie Thomas, she played the piano for so long. Why did they wait so long to have her service? And by the time they have it, she'll reincarnate and come back and play for it. I think it's a long time. But it's like that whole thing we're waiting for. What is that? What are we waiting for that we don't have? That's the question we don't ever ask ourselves. What is it I'm waiting for that I don't already have? Well, I don't think I have it because I don't see it. I don't know where to look for it. Well, what if we made a commitment to say that the real aspect of ourselves is invisible, and I've never opened my mind to that yet? It doesn't mean it's not there. I just have not yet touched it. Do I believe enough in that idea to pursue that, to lay down my preconceived ideas, to stop waiting and say, here I am, Lord? Open my mind to that deeper reality, that deeper truth. But when you think about, so your spiritual journey is not about inventing laws. It's not about inventing a soul. It's not about developing a spiritual nature. It's about discovering what's already here. The process of transforming the self-image and accessing the soul are two entirely different things. What many people call the spiritual path is the attempt to improve the self-image, to spiritualize the self-image. That has nothing to do with spiritual discovery, zero. Because what you do to improve the self-image is you try to get positive thoughts and you cram them in your consciousness and you try to hold them there. I'm a child of God. I'm unlimited. I'm this, I'm that. Try to hold that thought there, and you go to the bank and they say your account's been drained. And what do? Do you say, oh, that doesn't matter because I'm an infinite child of God? You freak out. It has nothing to do with what you're trying to cram into your brain, because you haven't touched that deeper reality that is the soul. So self-improvement, there's nothing wrong with self-improvement. There's nothing wrong with trying to improve the self-image. There's nothing wrong with trying to upgrade your self-esteem. But what I have discovered is people who have that effervescent personality have the lowest self-esteem on the planet. The ones that are trying to convince the world that they're the happiest are often the unhappiest. That's the self-image. You can improve that. You can convince the world that it's in good shape. But that's a totally different path than the spiritual awakening. And that's what we don't understand. What we are trying to do collectively is improve our collective self-image. That's the world we're waiting for, that new dawn. That when enough of us do this, and when enough of us get a positive thought in our brains, everything's going to change. Well, the laws are already there. It's not a matter of creating anything. It's a matter of adjusting to what is already here. That's the spiritual path, and that's exactly what the word prayer means, to make an adjustment. To adjust to the reality upon which we are from which we are expressing. That's a totally different thing, and it's not even a path. It's a revelation. When you think of a path, you think of linear. I'm here, I want to be there. How do you get there from here? What happens when you get there? I've gone over this with you before. You're still here. No matter where you think there, the perfect there is, it's always still here. Just go home and practice this. Stand in your living room, designate someplace there, walk over there. Where are you? I'm here. You never get there. But wherever you are, this is the good news. These laws are fully functioning, fully present, fully expressing. Is my attention going down into this level? That's the question. The answer usually is no. My attention is on there, someplace down the road. When I resolve this issue, or when I finally become illumined. You cannot experience illumination when you're moving on a linear path. When you think that what you are seeking is someplace in the future. You can't experience illumination because you're looking away from the only place that you can get it. That's within. So we take time to be still and to just let go of all of our preconceptions, to be willing to say, I know nothing about this, but I'm willing to learn. I believe, but help thou my unbelief. You don't have to know. And I have said over and over, why are we restless? Why are we unhappy? Why do we feel that something's missing in our lives? It's that image of Jesus. I stand at the door and knock. It's not Jesus. It's that soul, that true self of each one of us is standing at the inner door of our consciousness and knocking. And I feel it as unrest, unhappiness, dissatisfaction. something's missing. And I hope to get that something someplace in the future. So the process of transforming the self-image and accessing the soul are two entirely different things. Apples and oranges. You think of your soul as the eternal underlying set of laws, and that's kind of a cold way to think of your soul. But you think of, what is that in me that desires more? What is that that's pushing out, that's pushing forth? Every one of us have it. It's universal. As I pointed out, you catch a gnat in your hand, and it wants freedom. Everything that is alive is seeking greater freedom. There's something in us that does not want to be bound. And so we're dissatisfied because we're not adjusted to or in alignment with this deeper self. We're looking for it out there. We're asking, are we there yet? And we might pick up a book from, we had many speakers, as I said, in our conferences, and some of these folks were called futurists. And not a single prediction that I remember them making has come true. It's people who try to look at all of the events going on today, and this is much like the Old Testament prophets. They would look at what's happening in society today and make predictions about where it was going. You can make predictions about where it's going, and you can be totally right. That does not mean you're going to be spiritually illumined. It has nothing to do with it, nothing at all. It's like a futurist is looking someplace nobody can ever be. So how could you possibly find happiness contemplating something, a place you can never be? I just lost all faith in those folks. It took a couple of and thousands of dollars of bringing them in to speak to us, but that has nothing to do with reality. And you can predict trends. That's something, but that's a surface thing. That which we are looking for never changes and never leaves. It's always present. This is the spiritual path. It's waking up to what's already here, what's already available to us. The self-image may or may not accurately reflect the reality of the soul. Think of your soul as the eternal underlying laws, and the self-image may or may not accurately reflect the reality of the soul. Probably true. It's not doing that at this moment. It's why we feel off-centered. We feel like something's missing. So what do? We try to fix the self-image, and that's not necessary. That's not where we work. We work toward direct experience. The spiritual experience we seek is now present. The only thing that needs to change is the way we think of ourselves, and how does that occur? The only way your thinking will ever change is through experience. When you actually touch that live wire within you, that spiritual essence, that changeless reality, that gift from above, with whom there's no change or no variation due to change, whatever that is. That changeless reality, you touch that, and you realize you're an eternal being having this human experience, and that changes a lot of the way you think about your life right now. Certainly has completely changed the way I think about the spiritual journey, so-called journey. It's not a journey, because you don't have to go anywhere. It's an awakening to who you are at this now moment. All right? And again, any suggestions you have, let me know. I'm still continuing, and I might start up I will start up a series on the principles of spiritual principles that Jesus taught, or that we see in a lot of his sayings and so forth. Very interesting stuff. Okay, thanks for coming out. Hope to see you next week.